Thank you for having me here. Thanks for the whole team that has organized this effort. I'm happy to talk to you today about IoT and construction. I am sorry to be the one standing between you and lunch, so I hope that you are not very hungry. And I will do my best to keep this fun and short and sweet. So I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. I have been living in Los Angeles for the last 16 years with my family. I really enjoy the weather there. The outdoors are great. We are not enjoying traffic and how expensive Los Angeles is getting these days. So I can tell you I saw Mexico City, and you should not feel too bad about your traffic. I think we're worse. I also wanted to share with you the outcome of an exercise. It's good to know yourself as a student, as a professional, and at Enstoa we did an exercise of trying to understand our team's individual values as well as the overall company values. And we did this in conjunction with a professor from business school at Columbia, and I wanted to put these on the board, so that gives you a little bit more idea about what my core values are in work and life. So how did I'll tell you a bit about my journey, and I hope that you take out of this that you should not feel constrained of being in a siloed profession. I think the world is changing very fast. One thing that I like, that I read recently on the media lab at the MIT University, is they call themselves an anti-disciplinary lab. So I think with technology, there's a lot of disciplines and expertise coming together, and it's becoming accessible to everybody. So my journey in architecture started on a trip in 1996 to Istanbul. I fell in love with the city. I thought the architecture was great. I was too geeky about it. All of my friends were, waking up late. I was the first one on the tour bus because I wanted to see more of the city. And I had a very poetic view of architecture. And I thought that by doing architecture, I'm going to impact the civic environment. Then, after I graduated, I got to the professional world, and there was a reality check there. And I always had been interested in technology. In college, I took a course in GIS, and I asked the professor, so how come we have data, we have geometry about the whole country, and we don't have the same in a building? That was in 1998. And he told me, good question, I guess we have it reversed. So I was very happy when I was introduced to BIM in 2005, and that really, I think, shifted my career more towards technology. I was studying for the architect registration exam, and then I figured I want to invest my time in getting to know technology better. This is not a seismic map of California. This is actually dots of all projects that I worked on. There's a lot of there's been a mandate in California for hospitals to upgrade seismically, and I was lucky to be in that field because that gave me exposure to working on large programs that leveraged BIM, IPD, and Lean. In fact, I met Samir back in 2008 and got the first exposure to pull planning at the time. Then, after working on large programs, few IPD and design build projects that had Lean principles as part of the mandate by the owner, I just didn't feel like going back to the architectural studio. And I decided to go on my own and did some BIM consulting and studied how BIM can affect the ROI on construction. And luckily, 2 years into it, I met Enstoa, which I'll tell you a little bit more about and what we're doing. And we've been working with organizations that are not in the business of construction, but in order to deliver their business, they need to manage construction projects, like a hospital. The hospital deliver healthcare services. You go there to get patient treatment, but you need the space. So we work with these types of organizations. I'm specifically focused on the healthcare vertical, and we help organizations evaluate their team capability at the individual and holistic level through different strategy and consulting offerings. And we also look at optimizing their processes and also tying all of that into digital systems. So we try to really take the maturity level towards competitive and advantage. So Enstoa is a leading systems integrator. What does that mean? It means that we help organizations make sense of all of their systems. An organization may have financial systems, it may have construction systems, it may have space management systems, drawing systems, and to leverage the real benefit of data, you need to make sense of all of that. And what's really interesting is that the same silos that we talk about when we draw the architect, contractor, and the owner circles, it's evident. You see the same lines when you try to map out the data. I want to talk a little bit about our vision. We really believe in a world where we can achieve maximum return on investment on money spent on construction. I think this is really important. We really should leverage data and analytics to inform crucial decisions. So making sure that you capture data and you invest the time in capturing it and maintaining it is important, because we think that that's really a very valuable asset to make informed decision. And we think that the only way to reduce risks and challenges is by leveraging an evidence-based approach. And in order to do that, you have to really track your baseline performance and your improvements or lack of over time. So we basically, I think, oversaturated you with these graphics, but the reason why I brought them up is these are things that we don't just see in construction conferences like the one we are in right now. I think there's more awareness of the state of the construction industry. Before I show the next slide, I want to read the disclaimer. The illustration on the next slide was purely coincidence. Please don't hold it against me. It's pure luck or maybe bad luck. So this is the cover of The Economist magazine, and I'm just highlighting that on the cover of the magazine, it says construction, the least efficient industry. And obviously, The Economist is not a magazine that only architects and engineers read typically. This is something that has exposure to a wide audience. So people are catching on to this, this idea of lack of productivity in our effort. And I think on the panel yesterday, Patrick mentioned that eventually maybe a Henry Ford of some sort may come up and say, no, I can do it better than you guys are doing it. So this is something to be aware of. And I mentioned yesterday, for those of you who weren't here when we had the panel on Construction 4.0, is you got to think about it that there's somewhere in the world, in Mexico, in New York, in LA, in London, in China, there's an executive board meeting in some conference room on a high level, and they're thinking, where should we invest our money in? Should we invest our money in product development, in capital expenditure, in research, in the case of healthcare? And I think we have a lot of work to do, because we really want to move towards the jar on your right? We don't want to be perceived as the least return of investment type to do. So I want to talk a little bit about the name of Enstoa. A lot of people ask me about the name and then what we really do. The name comes from a architectural archetype. So for the students of architecture, I am sorry if I'm bringing bad memories from history of architecture classes. Bear with me for a second. But the reason why I bring it up is because the Stoa, several thousand years ago, was really a platform for human communication and interaction and conversations about knowledge. Some of the knowledge that was discussed back then, we still use it to govern, like democracy, the idea of republics. This is all from Greek antiquity. And the Renaissance, the whole humanism in the Renaissance was based on that. And it really was a great platform for people to talk and, philosophy, science, anything. Let's fast forward several thousand years later. The reason why I'm saying this, for those of you who were born in this day and age, I mean, when I went to school, I bought my first computer when I was in first year in college. I didn't have a phone until I was in the first year in college. So hopefully this may give you a little bit of perspective, especially for the younger generation, so that you don't take things for granted and that you understand the potential of what we're going through. The internet came as a platform for human communication. I remember when I first moved to the US, I used to walk to the liquor store to buy a card and then scratch it and call my parents back in Beirut. All of that disappeared a few years into it. There was like WhatsApp, there was a lot of voice over IP. You can really be in touch with people everywhere. And the impact was tremendous. I used to spend at least 45 minutes on a Friday after work back in 2004 at a Blockbuster movie rental, trying to pick up what movie I have to pick up. Now I spend 45 minutes, but trying to browse Netflix, but definitely a little bit more convenient. And Netflix has better suggestion engines. Toys R Us was a big hit. Kids love it. And this example, I bring it up because they recently just closed all of their stores, and not everything is great on the internet. I'm sure when my daughter looks back, she's going to say, you had that great thing. Why did you get rid of it? Just like I could go and pick up any toy. But the reason why I'm bringing these examples is that, we have to be careful not to become obsolete, because it may hit us before we know it. And again, I don't want to be painting a pessimistic idea, but it is really an opportunity if you are aware of it. I was not aware of any stats about the performance of construction industry when I was in college, not until maybe 5 years in my professional career. So I'm really happy that the audience here, a lot of the students, are getting an exposure to the challenges of the industry, and that's going to enable you to also suggest solutions and be the stewards of change. An example that's related to us, not too long ago, when I started using Revit, we were barely getting on Revit 8. It was, the typical DVD that you get from Autodesk, a box. And then since then, which is a pretty relatively short period of time for a company as big as Autodesk to shift its model all the way towards subscription. So that kind of gives you an idea. When I was first in when I got into architectural studios, we used to wait for the actual disc to be shipped to us. Now, if I decide I want to help a friend over the weekend to do some remodels of their house, we can just rent the software for a month. So big changes are here. And going back to platforms of human interaction, the internet for the longest time had been about people creating information and data about other people, about themselves, about the environment around them, and posting it on the internet. So most of the information on the internet has been created or authored by people, hence the Internet of People. Now, something changed. In 2008, for the first time, the number of things or devices on the internet have exceeded the number of people on the internet. And that was a big thing. And by 2014, there were actually over 10 billion devices on the internet, which means for every person out on the planet, there was about 1.5 devices. Now, if you do the research, there's variable results that you get, but for the most part, they're in the same ballpark. This is a projection of the number of devices in billions as expected by 2025. Now, this is really happening right now. It's been happening, and right now we kind of like a few years ago we put a tag on it, but most of you have IoT devices that you are carrying and you interact with. And these devices also interact with each other. And then every industry is trying to really figure out, the potential that come out of this. But really for us, the Internet of Things in construction is ultimately about everyday building components, thinking, reacting, processing, and participating together as a completely intelligent and smart organism. So ideally, similarly of how you can go to the doctor and have, periodic physical monitoring of your health. There's a lot of potential for us to capture information similarly about the buildings. And why is that important? Because this is giving us access to a lot of data. And this data, if well maintained, is going to enable us to come up with information and knowledge. Some of the things that we truly believe in and try to advocate with our clients, internally with our own organization, trying to keep reminding ourselves that data should be perceived as an asset. And that's something that was discussed earlier on the panel today. And the term graveyard of information was used. And you really have to think about your data as an asset. Data can be wasted. If it's not maintained, it could go to waste, and that's something that you don't want to happen. And data want to be analyzed. So anytime you have a chance to get a hold on any information, you should grab onto that and try to understand what that's telling you. And you don't just want to store it. It has to be lively. It's kind of like water. Water that becomes stagnant, becomes bad. It's not good for drinking or swimming, for that matter. It really needs to be flowing. And it should be used. And we should, I think specifically in the construction industry, try to shift that paradigm of trying to leverage data as a mediator or as a pool of knowledge for evidence-based decision making. Now, IoT and construction. So you could do a lot of research. I try to, there's a lot of examples on the internet. But what I wanted to do is give you a few that I think are relevant to the storyline that I'm about to say. We have to think about first things first. So in order for IoT to exist in construction, we need to make sure that the basics are there. We need to make sure that there's connectivity on a job site. And it's interesting now to see a lot of the tool providers have like innovation department, so like and technology departments. So a tool provider like DeWalt, I would recommend that you check out their website. It's really interesting. They're really thinking about how they can provide reliable connectivity on site so that, all of the different stakeholders can leverage that infrastructure to do whatever they need to do in terms of connectivity. They have some really interesting, I call them practical or tactical applications. So for a subcontractor, usually tools theft is a big issue. So right now they can basically geogrid their tools, and if you walk with a drill outside the job site, the supervisor can actually disable it, so it's no good to use, kind of like an alarm on a car. But I guess you could tell by now that I'm an avid reader of The Economist. I feel it just gives a good view of the world. There's been a report that you can look up. It's pretty extensive. It's about the Internet of Things. The Economist research in conjunction with ARM, ARM, and IBM, they developed what they're calling the IoT index, and they're tracking the use of IoT across different verticals throughout different regions around the world. And I wanted to highlight things that the survey respondents, in this case mostly executives and people in senior management positions, right now there's concerns about the high cost of infrastructure, and there's also concerns about security. There's a lot of creativity going on the job site in terms of being able to monitor workers' productivity, safety, if you walk somewhere where you don't need to walk, it's not safe to walk in on site, an alarm beeps. But these are things that we don't know yet how the human, or our culture will interact with, because like you may not want to feel monitored as you're doing your work all the time. And the big question, what can IoT do, and when will it deliver on the promise of construction, transformation, and productivity? I think there's a lot of I've been to a lot of conferences, such as this one, since 2005. It's pretty inspiring, but I feel one of the risks that we have is that we sometimes tend to run forward. We basically latch on to the next buzz thing and think it's going to save the world, our world, but it's not really the case necessarily. There's like some really practical problems that we have to think about, like increased age of average workers in the US specifically. I'm not very sure about Mexico. That's a big challenge. But IoT is already delivering on that, or for those of out there that are in touch with the technologies, our friends from Trimble, you can go check out their booth. They have this mixed reality solutions. There are several other ones out there I'll show in a bit. But if you think about a seasoned, skilled worker who can no longer be on site, I know in the US right now, retiring at 64 is a thing of the past. Nobody can afford to retire at 64. So if you are an experienced worker who still have the drive to work, but you're not like able to do the physical side of it and be on site, you can be in the back office and you can be mentoring a group of junior workers, and you have access to what they're seeing at any point in time, and they can, it's like more of a coaching experience. Another thing that I want to talk about is we think about some of the stats we learned this week is that 40% of waste in the world is created by buildings. Well, we all want to be working on the most exciting BIM projects. We all want to be invited to conferences to talk about the lovely airport that we built or the amazing hospital that we built and be on the cover of the magazine. But the largest stock of buildings on the planet are buildings that already exist. And I would argue that between or among these buildings that already exist, the vastest majority is not delivered in BIM, maybe in CAD, but there's probably a lot of buildings out there that just have blueprints. And there's also a lot of devices and solutions that I think is going to help in this area. There are devices out there. DAQRI is one of them. I would encourage you to look it up. Basically, the glasses have a 3D laser scanner on them, so anybody can really put it on, and then as they're walking through, obviously the accuracy is not going to be similar to a station like that you put on a tripod, but these things are going to help. Now, whether you've heard a lot about IoT, IPD, in my personal opinion, I think there are no silver bullets out there. There are no magic wands. You still have to do the hard work, and I think the hardest thing is to figure out how we interact and how we work together as a whole in the industry. And again, there's some very practical or mundane problems, if you want to call them, that are there that we have to resolve. Like in the US, for example, during the recession, a lot of workers left the construction industry, and there's a lot of work to do to attract people back into our profession. It's time for cocktails. Not really, not yet. There's lunch before and then cocktails after. But this is another stat, and it shows that our industry has a substance use and abuse problem, and these are things that are, to me, are grounding in a way. Technology is going to help solve a lot of things, but we can't turn our back to the human side of what we do. And the way I see these, I guess I'm, after seeing all the students, I'm making a lot of school references. So this looks like a chemistry class. A little bit earlier, I had almost like a history lecture on Stoas. But I see these things as more of catalysts. So an IPD form of agreement is going to catalyze the team working together on a construction job to work together. Somebody challenged me in the beginning. I was like preaching about IPD, and he said, well, look, if you need a contract to have people work together and collaborate, then you're working with the wrong people. Obviously, it's a very smart comment, but I think if you have a contractual agreement that's based on incentives rather than basically it's kind of like more of a carrot approach, I guess, as opposed to a stick approach. Like if you do this, we'll be penalized. Or like if you do this, we're going to incentivize you because you're going to share the reward at the end. I want to leave you with a wordy slide, but I'm just going to read. This is a study by Stanford University School of Business, and I'm going to read the highlighted items. It says, all the internal opportunities have been exhausted. Now the mentality has changed. Companies have to gain efficiencies with the supply chain. As a result, many share information that used to be proprietary. That was a study about manufacturing in 1999. I'd like to think, maybe I'm an optimist, that this actually we may start seeing evidence in construction about teams trying to optimize the overall supply chain, not just my supply chain as a concrete subcontractor or as a mechanical subcontractor or as a designer, but the whole team. With that said, we have 2 more minutes left, so hopefully that will help you get to lunch faster. Thank you again for having us here. The team organizing this, it's just a phenomenal job. Pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you.